They called it a strategy session, but the air crackled with something sharper than ambition, a cold, practiced cruelty disguised as corporate charm. Around the table, expensive suits traded knowing glances, smirks danced behind coffee cups, and one man sat silent, dark-skinned and keen-eyed, absorbing every slight like fuel. They measured him with dismissive precision, labeling him reckless, unfit, ambitious in all the wrong ways. But no one asked where the money came from, whose silent backing turned dreams into blueprints, whose signature underwrote every promise they made. They didn't know the cost of their mockery, or that the day would come when he'd decide they would finally pay it in full. If you want to see how this unfolds, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the rest, and tell me in the comments what you think about this setup and where you're reading from. Malcolm Bennett sat at the head of the gleaming glass conference table, reviewing his notes one last time as dawn's pale light spread across the skyline outside. The 36th floor boardroom was hushed except for the hum of the air system and the occasional clink of a coffee cup being set down. He had asked everyone to be there early, not out of ego, but because this meeting mattered more than any he had run since taking over as CEO. Today he was unveiling the Midwest Expansion Initiative, a growth strategy meticulously prepared over 6 months, supported by market research, financial modeling, and dozens of hours of his own time spent refining the pitch. He'd taken special care to anticipate every question, every challenge, every potential roadblock. When the last executive filed in, he waited for silence, then stood. "Good morning," he began, voice calm, confident. "Thank you for making the early hour. I promise it'll be worth it." He clicked the remote, and the first slide snapped onto the screen. Midwest Expansion Initiative. The clean lines and carefully chosen colors reflected the work he'd put in. We're looking at a 5-year plan with clear ROI targets, focusing on underserved regions with high projected growth. This is how we become the dominant player in our sector. His voice was steady, but his eyes moved across the room, reading the expressions. At first, some tried to look attentive. Alicia, the CFO, squinting at the slide. James from marketing tapping a pen against his pad, pretending to make notes. But at the far end of the table sat Richard Holloway, Senior VP of Operations. Richard didn't even try to hide his disinterest. He leaned back, one ankle resting on his knee, arms spread arrogantly along the back of his chair. He waited just long enough for Malcolm to click to the next slide, one detailing the break-even timeline, before letting out a huge, exaggerated sigh. It was loud, intentional. It cut through Malcolm's words like a blade. The room froze. Alicia's pen hovered mid-scribble. James lowered his pad, eyes darting between them. Richard didn't stop there. He shifted in his chair and rolled his eyes so obviously it was theatrical. "Jesus," he muttered, loud enough to carry. "Ambitious, huh?" The sarcasm in his voice was so heavy it almost seemed to coat the glass walls. Malcolm stopped mid-sentence. The projector fan sounded suddenly too loud. He set down the remote carefully. "Richard," he said, his voice measured, "is there something you'd like to say to the team?" Richard smiled, slow and mocking. "Oh, I'm just wondering if maybe we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Don't want the board thinking we're unrealistic." He dragged out the last word, savoring it. Someone stifled a laugh. Malcolm turned his head in time to see it. A junior analyst, young and ambitious, but spineless, suppressing a smirk and coughing to hide it. Her boss, the director of sales, didn't even pretend to be neutral. He just smiled and nodded in Richard's direction. It was so brazen, so unguarded. The performance of respect was gone. Malcolm inhaled slowly. "The projections are conservative," he said, voice clipped. "They've been modeled with 3 risk scenarios and stress-tested by finance." He shot a look at Alicia. She flinched, then quickly looked back down at her notes. Richard gave a patronizing nod. "Sure. Just don't want us biting off more than we can chew. Wouldn't want any misunderstandings with the board." His tone was thick with implication. The room felt colder. Malcolm glanced around. Nobody was looking at him. They were all watching Richard, gauging his mood, following his lead. Richard sat back with a smirk, arms crossed, completely at ease. The analyst coughed again, this time less subtle, more mocking. Her eyes glittered with amusement. Malcolm felt the heat in his chest. He forced himself to speak. If there are questions about the data, let's discuss them. Richard cut in, shaking his head. No, I think we get it. Big dreams. Ambitious plans. Just might be better to keep our feet on the ground. A couple of people actually chuckled. Malcolm felt it like a slap. He pressed his lips together so tightly they went white. He'd seen this game before. This wasn't skepticism. This was sabotage. It was performance, showing everyone in the room that Richard was the real authority. But even as he opened his email, he felt the unease. He knew men like Richard didn't just rely on insults and eye rolls. They worked systematically, slowly undermining every piece of authority until you had none left. It didn't take long to prove his suspicion right. His inbox was flooded with chain emails, reply-alls about the new supply chain pivot, and at the top was a freshly marked urgent thread titled Revised Leadership Meeting Agenda. He opened it. His eyes scanned the bullet points, the date. Next Tuesday, a high-level executive meeting with a board liaison attending. He felt his heart thud once, hard. His name wasn't there. The attendee list was short. Richard Holloway, Alicia, James from marketing, Marcus from HR, 4 people. No Theo. He read it again, deliberately, fingers tightening on the mouse. No mistake. He scrolled down to the bottom, seeing the breezy note from the coordinator. Thanks all. Per Richard's guidance, we're streamlining to essential contributors. Essential. Malcolm felt his teeth grind. Essential. He picked up his phone, ready to call the meeting planner, but forced himself to put it down again. He would not explode over email. He would not make threats on the phone. He would handle this like a professional, even if no one else seemed interested in acting like one. Instead, he stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked to Richard's office. The hall was quiet, but he felt the buzz of whispers as he passed. A couple of analysts ducked their heads into their cubicles, as if caught eavesdropping. When he got to Richard's door, he knocked once and didn't wait for permission before pushing it open. Richard was leaning back in his chair, chatting with Marcus from HR, both men looking up in mild surprise. Malcolm didn't bother with greetings. He held up his phone. "This meeting you scheduled," he said, voice carefully controlled. "Why am I not on the list?" Richard didn't even flinch. He just smiled slowly, sitting up a little and folding his hands in front of him. "We thought it would be more efficient to keep tight," he said. "Don't want to waste everyone's time with too many voices." Malcolm felt the heat rise up his neck. "I'm the CEO. This is a strategic meeting about our entire direction." Richard nodded as if placating a child. Sure. But you're a big picture guy. We'll loop you in once we've handled the nuts and bolts." Malcolm looked at Marcus, who suddenly found something fascinating in his lap. "You agreed with this?" Malcolm demanded. Marcus shifted, clearing his throat. "Well, Richard suggested." Malcolm cut him off. "So it's Richard's company now?" Richard raised his eyebrows. "Easy," he said with false calm. "No need to get emotional. It was just a clerical decision. Nothing personal." Malcolm let that hang in the air. Nothing personal. He felt his fingers curling, nails digging into his palm. He thought of that meeting yesterday. The coughing analyst. The laughter. The knowing glances. They had all been given permission to disrespect him. And now here was Richard, acting like it was normal to schedule a leadership meeting without the CEO. "You're going to fix it," Malcolm said quietly. Richard's eyebrows went higher. "Fix what?" Malcolm swallowed the rage that threatened to spill over. "Put me on the invite." Richard looked at Marcus. They exchanged a look that wasn't even subtle. Marcus actually smiled before wiping it off quickly. "Of course," Richard said slowly, drawling it out as though explaining it to someone with learning difficulties. "We'll fix the clerical error." He leaned back, folding his arms. "No big deal. Don't overreact." Malcolm didn't trust himself to speak. He stood there for another heartbeat, watching them both, memorizing every flicker of disdain on their faces. Then he turned on his heel and walked out without another word. He felt the eyes on him as he went down the hall. He imagined the Slack messages firing off. the private jokes, the rolling eyes behind his back. He got back to his office and shut the door with a quiet click. He sat down and pulled up the email again. He stared at the word streamlining until the letters blurred. He felt sick because he knew what it meant. They weren't just disrespecting him. They were building a case. They wanted a record showing he wasn't involved. They wanted the board to see plans without his fingerprints, so that later, if they needed to, they could say he wasn't leading at all. He wasn't essential. Richard loved these calls. He loved schmoozing with the wealthy old men in suits, cracking jokes, pretending to be one of them. Malcolm spent 2 days crafting the perfect pitch deck, balancing aggressive growth with risk mitigation, tailoring it to the exact concerns those investors had voiced. He made sure to circulate the materials early to the entire leadership team. When the time came, he put on his best suit, knotted his tie so precisely it could have been on the cover of GQ, and logged in 10 minutes early, camera and mic check twice. As the screen populated with faces, investors in New York, Chicago, San Francisco, he sat up straight, radiating calm confidence. "Good morning, everyone," he began, voice strong even. "Thank you for taking the time. I'm excited to show you where we're heading." He clicked to the first slide. As you can see, we've identified underserved metro regions that are growing at 4.8% above national average. And our logistics cost projections have dropped thanks to supplier consolidation. He was hitting his stride. The investors were nodding. Even Alicia, who had been chilly all week, was actually paying attention, brows knitted in thought as she scribbled notes. Malcolm felt his heart lift a fraction. This is how you shut them up. Data, clarity, professionalism. But just as he clicked to the slide with the forecast graphs, Richard's voice cut in. "Sorry, Malcolm," he drawled, leaning into his camera, his smug grin visible even pixelated. "I think we should pause here." Malcolm blinked. "Excuse me?" Richard waved a dismissive hand, eyes shifting to the investors. "Before we get too deep in these projections, maybe we should hear from someone with real experience. James, you want to weigh in on whether these are actually doable?" Silence fell for half a beat. Then James from marketing cleared his throat, clearly caught off guard but trying to play along. Sure, Richard. I mean, I have some thoughts, but..." He trailed off. Malcolm's jaw tightened. "I'm in the middle of the presentation," he said flatly. Richard smirked, leaning back. "Yeah, I know. Just thought maybe the team would appreciate a little reality check before you sell them the moon." A couple of the investors chuckled. It wasn't even hidden. One of them actually unmuted to say, "No harm in hearing another perspective, Malcolm. Keep it balanced, right?" Malcolm sat there, his hands folded so tightly the skin blanched. He stared at the screen, at the little box that held Richard's gleeful face, waiting. He realized then that Richard had decided the call was his now. He'd won the room in 10 seconds with one line. Malcolm felt the old anger rise up, hot and acid in his throat. He wanted to shout, but he knew how that would look, so he smiled. It was the coldest smile he had. "By all means," he said, voice like a blade. "Let's hear James's thoughts." James, who hadn't even read the full deck, babbled for 3 minutes about marketing potential and brand awareness, while Malcolm watched the investor faces glaze over. He heard Richard's low chuckle when James mentioned urban demographics, with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. After the call, Malcolm closed his laptop with shaking hands. He knew exactly what Richard had done. He'd undermined him in front of their most important partners, stolen the authority right out from under him while pretending it was just healthy debate. He wasn't even subtle anymore. It was open, naked sabotage. And Malcolm knew it would be worse in person. He was right. The next day, the leadership team met in the boardroom to debrief. Malcolm walked in first, sat at the head of the table, and waited. Richard strolled in 5 minutes, late with a coffee in hand, dropping into his chair with an exaggerated sigh. "Phew," he said. "Long night." That investor call was something. He gave Malcolm a mock-innocent smile. "You okay, big guy?" Seemed a little tense. Malcolm didn't take the bait. He laid out the revised strategy notes, reading through them calmly, refusing to acknowledge Richard's jabs. But Richard wouldn't let it go. When Malcolm mentioned target cities with strong Black and Latino markets, Richard snorted so loudly everyone turned. "Careful," he said, voice dripping sarcasm. "Don't want to get too urban, huh?" There was a heartbeat of silence. Then someone stifled a laugh. James actually coughed to cover it. Even Alicia didn't say anything, just looked away, lips pressed in a thin line. The next day, he came in early and prepared for his meetings as if nothing had happened, determined to show them he was unbreakable. But as he sat at his desk reviewing the latest marketing projections, his phone buzzed relentlessly. He ignored it at first. Then he noticed the subject lines. "Urgent. Please review. Concerns about CEO conduct." He frowned and opened one. His blood ran cold. An anonymous email had gone out late the night before, addressed to the entire management team, with CCs to legal and HR. It accused Malcolm of inflating the company's diversity numbers in quarterly reports for PR gains, claiming he had instructed HR to count contractors and short-term hires as permanent staff to look more inclusive. It read with a carefully crafted faux sincerity, full of phrases like, "As someone who values transparency, and I just think the board deserves to know." But it wasn't subtle. It painted him as a dishonest, scheming opportunist who was willing to lie to make himself look good. Malcolm stared at the screen, feeling his stomach twist. He knew immediately this wasn't a real whistleblower complaint. It was calculated, a precise attack designed to sow distrust, to turn his strongest message, growth through inclusion, into a liability. He felt the heat rising to his face, his teeth clenching so hard his jaw ached. He stood, pacing the room. He thought of Richard's smug grin during the investor call, of the mocking laughter in the boardroom. This was the next escalation. Undermine his credibility, destroy his moral authority, make the board see him as a liability. He called HR immediately. Marcus picked up, sounding cautious. "Marcus, did you see the email?" Malcolm demanded. There was a pause. "Yeah, we're looking into it." Malcolm closed his eyes, trying to keep his voice level. "I want a meeting today. All senior leadership. We're going to address it head-on. I'm not letting this rumor stand." Marcus hesitated. "Malcolm, I don't think that's a good idea." Malcolm felt his pulse spike. "Excuse me? It's just it would be too divisive. We don't want to make things worse." Malcolm let out a harsh laugh. "It's already worse. An anonymous email just called me a liar. It accused me of manipulating the company's own diversity records. And you think ignoring it will help?" Marcus was quiet for a beat. "I get that you're upset, but addressing it in a big meeting will just give it oxygen. It'll make people pick sides. It's better if we let it die quietly." Malcolm couldn't believe what he was hearing. He felt something in him crack, just a little. He lowered his voice so it wouldn't shake. "So let me be clear, Marcus. An anonymous slander email goes out to the entire leadership team, and your plan is to pretend it didn't happen? That's your idea of HR leadership?" Marcus sighed, exasperated now. "Malcolm, this isn't personal. It's about stability. You don't want the board thinking you're overreacting to one stupid rumor. Let it fade. Don't turn it into a crisis." Malcolm's grip on the phone tightened so much his knuckles went white. "It is a crisis," he hissed. "It's an attack on my integrity, my reputation, my ability to lead this company. And you're telling me to sit quietly while they try to tear me down." Marcus was silent. Finally, he muttered, "I'm sorry, Malcolm. I can't support a big confrontation. It's too risky." Malcolm hung up without another word. He felt sick. He knew exactly what was happening. Richard had escalated. First the public disrespect, then the investor sabotage. Now this. A whisper campaign, carefully constructed to make him look corrupt. They wanted to kill the expansion plan by killing its credibility. But they also wanted to destroy him personally, to make the board see him as incompetent, dishonest, a diversity hire who'd lied to get where he was. He stood behind his desk, hands pressed flat on the cool surface, breathing hard. He could imagine Richard's voice in the hallway already. "Hey, I don't know anything about that email. But if it's true, well, it would be pretty serious, right?" Malcolm squeezed his eyes shut. He knew that voice. He'd heard it 100 times before in different bodies. The men who smiled while sticking the knife in your back, who pretended to be professional while they destroyed you. He straightened. He wasn't going to let them win. He opened a new document and began typing. He wrote a calm, precise memo to the entire leadership team. Today was the press event that would showcase their 5-year vision. This was his opportunity to speak directly to investors, reporters, and industry insiders about the Midwest Expansion Initiative, the plan he had fought for, refined, and defended at every turn. He arrived early at the converted downtown loft they'd rented, a cavernous, tastefully decorated space with industrial beams, warm lighting, and sleek projection screens. The catering crew was setting up coffee and pastries in the back. Marketing interns were pinning large foam core posters with brand slogans to the walls. He watched them carefully, ensuring the event would reflect the company's professionalism. This was, after all, the face of their future. He greeted Alicia, who was reviewing her speaking notes, and James, who had found time to memorize his bullet points for once. They both looked at him warily, but didn't say much. Malcolm knew they were worried about the fallout from the email leak, that they wished he would lie low. But this event wasn't theirs to control. It was his stage. He stepped up to the registration table and asked the coordinator for a copy of the printed agenda. She flipped open a box of glossy programs, handing him one with a bright, confident smile. He thanked her, took it to the side, and opened it, and froze. He read the agenda once, then twice, then a third time. Nowhere on it was his name. The entire plan he had spent months refining was there. The presentation slot was there. But it didn't say Malcolm Bennett, CEO. It said presented by Richard Holloway, Senior VP Operations. He felt a strange, cold pressure in his chest. His fingers pressed so hard into the glossy paper that it creased. He looked up, scanning the room. Richard was by the bar, sipping coffee, talking with 2 local business journalists. He spotted Malcolm looking at him and smirked, lifting his cup in a lazy salute. Malcolm's teeth ground together. He forced himself to breathe through his nose. He turned sharply on his heel and headed toward the corner where the PR lead, a woman named Danielle, was hunched over a laptop reviewing social media feeds. She glanced up as he approached, startled. Malcolm. Morning. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He held up the agenda, the paper shaking only slightly. My name isn't on this. Danielle blinked, adjusting her glasses, pretending to be confused. What do you mean? It says Richard's presenting the expansion plan. The CEO's name isn't even on the schedule. She squinted, took the program, and glanced at it. She gave a small, theatrical frown. Must have been a last-minute change. By who? Malcolm demanded, voice low, tight. Danielle set the paper down and raised her palm slightly. I don't know. Richard said he was leading the talk. I assumed it was approved. Approved by who? Malcolm snapped. She looked past him, eyes darting nervously to where Richard stood chatting with journalists. Then she shrugged. Look, she said, her voice turning dismissive, the professional polish slipping. We went with the faces the public expects. No one wants surprises at these things. For a heartbeat, Malcolm thought he might actually lose it. His vision narrowed to a sharp tunnel focused on her cool, disinterested face. Faces the public expects. The words rattled around in his head, ugly and obvious. He breathed so hard he worried he'd start shaking. He swallowed the fury like poison. So that's it, he asked. Danielle shrugged again. You can talk to Richard if you want, but the programs are printed. She turned back to her laptop, as if he were dismissed. He stood there for another second, staring at the side of her face. Then he turned and walked away, before he said something he couldn't take back. He went to the side of the room, his mind racing. He could see people arriving, staff from local business groups, investors they were courting for Series D, reporters pulling out notebooks. He felt their eyes slide over him, some nodding politely, others looking right through him. The CEO, without a slot to speak. He watched Richard, who was now gesturing expansively at one of the posters, bragging about the company's new vision, practically performing for the cameras. Malcolm realized with a sick certainty that this had never been a mistake. But he wouldn't let it happen. He arrived before anyone else, turned on the lights in his corner office, and reviewed every line of the expansion plan again. He practiced answers to anticipated objections. He called the legal department about filing an official complaint about the agenda manipulation at the press event. He wasn't going to let them make him into a victim quietly. He would fight. He would demand the respect that his position and his work deserved. But that resolve was about to be tested in ways he hadn't imagined. Around 10 a.m., Malcolm was reviewing supplier contract language when Alicia, his CFO, knocked on his door looking pale. She held her phone in her hand like it was a bomb. "Did you see this?" she asked. Malcolm frowned. "See what?" She held it up. It was an internal email thread. Subject line: Emergency Meeting, Board Strategy Review. The meeting was in progress. No one had invited him. His stomach turned to lead. He scrolled quickly. Richard had scheduled it that morning at 7:30 a.m., sending invites to every VP, Alicia included. Malcolm wasn't on it. He looked up at her slowly. Alicia looked stricken. "I'm so sorry. I thought you knew. I joined late because of a client call, but Richard's been presenting your entire expansion plan, and he's calling it reckless." The words hit him like a punch. "He's what?" Malcolm rasped. Alicia swallowed. "He's saying you rushed the numbers, that you're overextending us. He says it'll bankrupt the company in 2 years if we follow your projections. He's calling it reckless, irresponsible leadership." Malcolm felt heat crawl up his neck, anger mixing with humiliation until his vision went blurry at the edges. "He's telling the board that?" Alicia winced. "They're all listening. He's got charts and graphs. I think he redid your entire model. It's not accurate, but he's convincing." Malcolm closed his eyes. This was beyond disrespect. This was the kill shot. He didn't even get a chance to defend himself. No chance to even be in the room. Richard had stolen the narrative, twisted it to make Malcolm look like an incompetent, reckless fool, and then sold it to the people who had the power to fire him. Alicia shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I'm not defending him. I just thought you should know. He's even telling jokes about it." The room's on his side. Malcolm opened his eyes. "What kind of jokes?" She looked away. He said something like, "I guess Malcolm's idea of due diligence is crossing his fingers." People laughed. The breath left Malcolm's lungs. Alicia's voice was low. Some of the VPs were messaging each other in Slack while he talked. "I saw one say, 'Malcolm the Magnificent rides again.' They're making memes, Malcolm. They think it's funny." His hands were trembling now. He clenched them until the knuckles went white. He felt like he might explode, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Thank you for telling me," he said evenly. Alicia hesitated. "You want me to pull up the call so you can join?" Malcolm shook his head slowly. "No, it's too late now. He wanted me out of the room. I'm not giving him the satisfaction of showing up unprepared." Alicia bit her lip. "I'm sorry." Malcolm turned away. He didn't want her to see his face. "You should get back to the call. Tell them I'm reviewing the projections again. Say whatever you have to say. I'll handle this." She left, closing the door softly behind her. For a long moment, Malcolm just stood there. He felt the fury surge, so hot he thought he might throw something across the room. But he didn't. Instead, he walked to the window and stared at the city spread out below, the glass towers gleaming in the morning sun. He pressed his palms flat against the window, feeling the cold seep into his skin. He knew Richard, knew the type. They didn't just want to win, they wanted to humiliate. And for a long time, he had sat in silence, fingers steepled under his chin, asking himself if it was even worth it. But he knew the answer. He wasn't going to be the man they wanted him to be. The humiliated, marginalized CEO quietly pushed out while they chuckled and reshuffled their power. He wasn't going to let them win. As dawn broke, he put on his suit, tied his tie carefully, and walked to the elevator with his jaw set. He arrived at the office just before 7. The halls were empty, but lights glowed behind closed doors. The company was buzzing early because they all knew something was wrong. His rebuttal had circulated to every director and board member. The finance team had questions. The lawyers wanted a meeting. The HR department was in a panic. Richard Holloway hadn't answered any emails since the night before. Malcolm dropped his briefcase in his office, checked his watch, and walked straight to the boardroom without pausing to collect notes or even a coffee. When he opened the door, the room fell silent. Every VP was there, some pretending to look busy on their tablets, others watching him with guarded expressions. Richard sat at the far end, arms crossed, trying to look relaxed but failing. His eyes tracked Malcolm with a tension he couldn't hide. Malcolm didn't speak right away. He looked around the table slowly, letting the silence stretch. He wanted them to remember this moment. Then he pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down with deliberate calm. "I trust everyone's had time to read my memo," he said evenly. No one replied. He raised an eyebrow. "No questions? Nothing to clarify?" Alicia shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking to Richard and back to her tablet. James cleared his throat but didn't look up. Malcolm waited another beat, then nodded once. Noted. He closed the folder in front of him and stood. The entire room watched him in confusion. Richard tried to speak, voice cracking slightly with false authority. "Malcolm, let's not turn this into a..." Malcolm turned and fixed him with a stare so cold the words died in Richard's mouth. Noted, Malcolm repeated. Then he walked out, shutting the door behind him with a quiet click. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew exactly what he was going to do. He didn't go back to his office. He went straight to the elevator, down to the lobby, and out into the biting morning air. He walked a block in silence, the wind whipping at his coat, until he reached the private car waiting for him. He got in and pulled out his phone. He scrolled to a number he hadn't used in months, his family office director, a woman who had known him since he was a boy. She picked up on the first ring. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett." Her voice was calm, professional, but with an undertone of familiarity. "Morning," he said, voice even. "I need you to do something for me." There was a pause as she waited. He exhaled. "Freeze the funding. All of it." Another pause. "Are you sure?" she asked carefully. He closed his eyes. "I'm sure. $3.5 billion. Every tranche, every line of credit, every guarantee we extended to them for this expansion. I want it locked. Today." She didn't argue. She only said understood and hung up. He sat back against the seat, the tension slowly leaving his shoulders. He felt hollow, exhausted, but unbreakable. They thought they could humiliate him in front of the press, undermine him to the board, exclude him from meetings about his own company, trash his plan, his integrity, and his reputation. They thought they could do it all because they assumed he needed them more than they needed him. But they'd forgotten who he really was. They'd forgotten how this deal had even come together, that it was his money. He was just making sure they finally understood the cost of fighting him. Around noon, the messages stopped being polite. They turned desperate. "Please, we need you. You have to come in. We're begging you." Finally, there was a single line from Alicia. "Richard is convening an all-hands crisis meeting at 1 p.m. The board will be there. If you don't show, they'll pin this all on you." Malcolm set his cup down, stood, and smoothed the front of his shirt. He walked to his closet and chose his darkest suit, one with razor-sharp shoulders and pressed lines, the one he wore to funerals and negotiations with men who didn't think he belonged at their table. He tied his tie carefully, inspected the knot, adjusted his cuffs. Then he picked up his phone, keys, and wallet and left his apartment without saying a word to himself in the mirror. He didn't need to rehearse. He already knew what he was going to say. When he arrived at the building, he didn't rush. He let the receptionist's eyes widen when she saw him, let her stammer that they were in a meeting right now without blinking. He walked past her with measured steps, the silence of the lobby swallowing every sound of his shoes on the tile. The elevator doors closed slowly in front of her shocked face. When he stepped out onto the executive floor, he could hear them before he even opened the boardroom door. Raised voices, Richard's voice most of all, pitched high and tight with anger masquerading as leadership. "I'm telling you it's sabotage. He's blackmailing us. We can't let one man hold the entire company hostage. Malcolm turned the handle and pushed the door open without knocking. Every voice in the room died. Heads turned. The room fell so silent he could hear the hum of the recessed lights in the ceiling. He let the silence hang. He didn't smile, didn't greet anyone. He just walked slowly to the head of the table, eyes locked on Richard, who had frozen with his mouth half open, a vein pulsing at his temple. Malcolm didn't sit. He rested his palms on the table, leaned in slightly, and let his gaze sweep across every face. Board members, VPs, department heads, Alicia, Marcus from HR, James from marketing. He let them squirm. Then he spoke in a voice so calm it seemed to cut through the room, like ice. You wanted me here. I'm here. No one spoke. Richard's mouth closed, lips pressing into a white line. Malcolm straightened. Let's talk about what's actually happening, he said. He turned his head slightly, scanning them again. You're all panicking because the funding's gone. Contractors are walking. Payroll projections are red. Vendors want guarantees you can't make. The entire expansion plan is collapsing. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Some dropped their eyes. Richard found his voice. This is your fault, he spat. You've destroyed everything we built. You're killing this company out of spite. Malcolm raised one hand. Richard shut up, like someone had flipped a switch. Malcolm lowered his hand slowly. You're half right, he said quietly. I did stop the funding. A shocked murmur rippled around the room. Malcolm let it roll over him. He didn't blink. But let's clear something up right now, he continued. I didn't kill the company. I built it. You just forgot that part. He turned and paced slowly along the length of the table, voice never rising but filling every inch of the space. You all thought I was just a hired executive, that I was some PR-friendly face you could trot out for investors while you ran things your way behind my back. But the truth is, you don't even exist without me, without my money, without my family office. He let that sink in. Richard's face had gone a blotchy red. A board member near the end of the table cleared his throat nervously. Malcolm, what are you saying exactly? Malcolm turned sharply to face him. I'm saying the $3.5 billion expansion was funded by my firm. Every line of credit, every investor commitment, every leveraged buyout you tried to float was guaranteed by my family office. I'm saying that the reason this company survived its last downturn was because I wrote a personal check to cover payroll when the banks wouldn't extend credit. I'm saying every single deal you've been bragging about for the past 5 years exists because I made it possible. He stepped closer to the table. I didn't just lead this company. I paid for it. I saved it. And you've spent the last month trying to humiliate me, exclude me, lie about me, undermine everything I built because you thought I wouldn't fight back. The silence was absolute. Malcolm's voice dropped even lower. You thought you could erase me, that you could call me incompetent, reckless, a liar, that you could make jokes about me in Slack while I wasn't in the room, that you could hold secret meetings and pitch my ideas without me. Richard Holloway was already sputtering, trying to regain the floor. You can't let him do this. He's blackmailing us, don't you see? He's going to ruin us all out of spite. But the board members weren't buying it anymore. Malcolm's reveal had hit them like a truck. They had been given a clean view of their own complicity, their arrogance, their reliance on money they hadn't respected. The chairwoman of the board, a no-nonsense financier with sharp eyes and a reputation for smelling weakness, slowly turned to Richard with ice in her voice. You told us he was the problem, she said, her words like knives. You assured us he didn't have the experience or vision. You said he was making reckless bets. You didn't tell us he was the one financing the entire expansion. Richard blanched. Look, it wasn't supposed to. He wasn't supposed to. But she cut him off with a single raised hand. Enough, she said coldly. She turned to the room. We're exposed. We have vendors pulling contracts, staff panicking, payroll hanging by a thread because of this sabotage you orchestrated. You undermined the CEO. You tried to cut him out of a plan he paid for. And you lied to this board about what you were doing. Richard opened his mouth, but the words died in his throat. Another board member, a quiet but respected figure from their largest institutional investor, spoke up. He told us the truth. We ignored it. We let this happen because we liked the excuses. A grim silence fell. The chairwoman leaned back in her seat, eyes narrowing at Richard. "You're done here. Effective immediately." Richard actually lurched in his seat, face going white. "What? No, you can't. I'm the only one who knows the operation." She didn't even blink. "Pack your office." She turned to Marcus from HR, who was pale and sweating at the end of the table. "Draft the paperwork. I want him escorted out today." Marcus nodded shakily. Richard looked around the room wildly, hoping for backup, but all he saw were lowered eyes. No one was going to save him. The board members were already looking at their phones, sending out urgent messages to salvage what they could. He realized with sick certainty that the laughter, the sarcasm, the private jokes and slack, they had all evaporated. No one was laughing now. Malcolm's name wasn't a punchline anymore. It was survival. Outside the room, word spread like wildfire. By the time Richard stormed out of the conference area, face red, hair mussed, two security staff trailing behind him to make sure he didn't cause trouble. Dozens of staff were pretending to work but watching him with wide eyes. He avoided them, head lowered, the last of his cocky arrogance bleeding out onto the carpet. Meanwhile, Malcolm was back in his office, reviewing contracts, marking up budgets, and preparing for the rebuild he knew would come next. He didn't smile. There was no triumph here, just necessity. He wasn't celebrating Richard's fall. He was ensuring the company's survival. A knock at his door broke the silence. It was Marcus from HR, still pale. He held a folder of termination papers. "He's gone," Marcus croaked. Malcolm didn't even look up. "Good." Marcus swallowed. "There's one more thing." Malcolm glanced at him coolly. Marcus shifted his weight nervously. The junior analyst. Natalie. She was on those Slack threads. Malcolm's eyes hardened. "I know." Marcus's voice shook. "She's in the lobby. She says she wants to talk to you. She's crying." Malcolm considered it. Then he shut his laptop slowly and stood. "Send her in." A minute later, the door cracked open and Natalie slipped in, face streaked with tears, shoulders hunched like she was trying to make herself smaller. Malcolm Bennett sat at the head of the long, polished table in the boardroom exactly 1 week after Richard's termination. The blinds were drawn halfway, letting in gray light that matched the mood of the room. Every chair was filled, but no one spoke. Papers rustled. Phones were muted and face down. The air was thick with the scent of brewed coffee gone cold and the sickly tang of fear. It wasn't the same fear as before. No one was afraid of Malcolm personally. They were afraid of what he represented now. Consequence. Change. A new order they could no longer laugh away with jokes on Slack or dismiss with eye rolls. He watched them carefully. Alicia, the CFO, looked tired but resolved. She hadn't slept much, trying to keep payroll running with half the contractors already jumping ship. James from marketing had lost his usual smirk. His jaw was tight, and he tapped his pen on his notes as if to release the tension. Marcus from HR was pale and sweaty. He looked like he'd aged a decade in a week. Malcolm let them stew for a full minute before he spoke. His voice was even, cold but measured. "You asked for this meeting," he said, eyes sweeping the table. "What do you want to say to me?" The board chair cleared her throat. She'd always been direct, and she didn't disappoint now. "Malcolm, we want to formally request you reconsider freezing the funding. We understand now what's at stake. We're willing to listen. We're ready to talk about what you want." He cocked an eyebrow. "You understand now?" She didn't flinch. She looked exhausted but determined. "Yes, we do. We understand that we mistook your leadership for something optional, that we forgot who made all of this possible, that you weren't just the CEO but the primary investor, the reason we even survived the last downturn." James shifted uncomfortably. "We didn't see it, or we didn't want to." Alicia jumped in quickly. "We all share responsibility. This isn't just about Richard. It's about a culture we let happen. We enabled it. We laughed along. We didn't back you when you needed it. We're asking you to give us the chance to make it right." Malcolm sat back, fingers steepled. He didn't speak for a while. He watched them squirm. He wanted them to feel the discomfort, the truth of their complicity, the sting of their cowardice. Finally, he nodded. "So you want the funding back? You want the contractors to return, the projects to resume, the payroll crisis to end?" They nodded eagerly, relief washing over their faces. Marcus looked like he might cry with gratitude. But Malcolm wasn't done. He leaned forward again, voice steady. "I'll consider it, but not on your terms. On mine." Silence. The board chair cleared her throat. "Name them." Malcolm's voice was like stone. "First, you will institute mandatory bias and harassment training. Not the bullshit online modules you click through in 10 minutes. Real training, led by external experts. Everyone at VP level and above attends in person. No exceptions. No one dared interrupt. Second," he continued, "you will overhaul hiring practices. You will prioritize recruiting from underrepresented groups at every level. You will partner with HBCUs and community organizations. You will ensure your candidate slates are diverse. And you will report those numbers quarterly, to me and to the board." Alicia swallowed hard but nodded slowly. Malcolm didn't stop. "Third, leadership must change. I want 2 new board members from underrepresented backgrounds within 6 months. I want at least 3 new VP-level hires reflecting this company's customer base, not just the faces you're comfortable with. I want mentorship programs in place, and I want those mentors to be you, the people in this room." James raised a hand tentatively. Malcolm's gaze pinned him in place. "What?" James licked his lips. You want us personally mentoring them?" Malcolm didn't blink. "Yes. You're going to teach them how to navigate this place. You're going to share your network, your knowledge, your influence, and you're going to listen to them in return." Marcus looked down at the table. His voice was a hoarse whisper. "And if we don't agree?" Malcolm's face was granite. "Then the money stays frozen. The expansion dies. The company bleeds out. And I walk away with my reputation intact while you all explain to the press, your employees, and your families why you refuse to change." The silence that followed was absolute. No one argued. They just sat there, feeling the weight of their own complicity, the terror of the abyss Malcolm was offering them as the alternative. Finally, the board chair nodded slowly. "Agreed," she said. "We'll pass the motions today. You'll have it in writing." Malcolm leaned back in his chair, finally allowing himself the ghost of a smile. "Good. Then we can begin." Months passed. The company didn't transform overnight. There were fights, resignations, ugly anonymous comments in surveys. But the changes stuck. Because they had to. James started showing up for mentorship sessions at 7 a.m., bleary-eyed, but there. He even got called out for interrupting lesson meetings. Alicia made recruiting from new sources her personal mission, spending weekends reviewing resumes from places their HR team had never even considered. Marcus, who had once refused to confront conflict at all, now enforced the new anti-harassment policy with a kind of grim zeal, handing out warnings and terminations without blinking. And Natalie, the junior analyst, who had coughed her laughter in the meeting all those months ago, stood up in front of an entire department one day with tears in her eyes and apologized for how she had contributed to the culture. She didn't just quit and run away. She owned it. She even started the company's first employee resource group for underrepresented analysts, something Malcolm quietly funded without ever asking for credit. The board meetings changed, too. When someone talked over a colleague, they got called out. When Richard's replacement tried to steamroll a budget proposal without feedback, Alicia shut him down publicly. Malcolm watched it all happen from his chair at the head of the table, hands folded, eyes steady. He didn't need to dominate every conversation. He just needed to make sure they remembered who they were and who he was. And one day, almost 6 months later, after a quarterly board review where they finally hit their growth targets again without compromising on values, the chairwoman stayed behind after everyone else had filed out. She didn't say much, just nodded once at Malcolm and held out her hand. He shook it firmly. "Thank you," she said, voice quiet but genuine, "for not letting us keep failing." Malcolm nodded once. "Just don't make me do it again." She managed a small, tired smile. "We won't." As she left, Malcolm sat back in his chair, letting the quiet settle over him. He thought about everything he'd been through, the jokes, the eye rolls, the sabotage, the threats. He thought about how easy it would have been to just walk away, to let them crash and burn on their own arrogance. But he hadn't, because leadership wasn't about revenge. It was about responsibility, about making sure the people who would come after him wouldn't have to fight the same battles in silence. He pulled up the next agenda item on his tablet and started making notes for the next meeting. The work wasn't over. It never would be. But now, at least, it felt like it was finally moving in the right direction. And that was enough, the end. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more gripping narratives about power, justice, and change, don't forget to show your support. Let us know you liked it and consider subscribing so you never miss the next chapter. I'd love to hear what you think about this plot. Was the ending satisfying? Did the transformation of the characters feel real to you? What would you have done in Malcolm's shoes? And tell me, where in the world are you reading from today? Drop a comment and share your thoughts.